Just a reminder, everybody, that we are starting late. We will only start at 3 minutes past, so we are not starting top of the hour due to people logging into the stream. Stand by till top of the hour. This is effectively 5 minutes to live, guys. Okay, that is top of the hour, everybody. 3 minutes to live. 3 minutes to live.
As the world reels from the worst pandemic in the last 100 years, it is more important than ever to have honest and frank conversations about the future. We believe that as a company, a sector and a society, we need to challenge behavior and form a new contract with South Africa. Today's conversation will be a robust discussion on the way forward. We believe that if we create clarity by deliberately defining it, we can all craft clearer contributions to the future. Welcome to the BDO Clarity Sessions.
Good morning and a warm welcome once more to BDO's second Clarity Session. My name is Iman Rapetti. I'm a broadcaster and an author. Clarity is part dictionary defined as freedom from ambiguity. It's a freedom most needed in a time of accelerated changes brought by a crippling global pandemic which is disrupting our lives not only psychologically but behaviorally and in our economies and in the way that we live. There is still much that is within our control to define and to direct for our common progress if we have the right information, shape the appropriate perspectives, and promote clarity about how to advance in ways we may never have before. I'm looking forward to hearing from our expert panel, and I anticipate an enlightening and fruitful outcome. I'm excited to kick things off with the chat with BDO CEO Mark Stewart, but first, here's Mark with some context about this important forum.
Today represents a journey. The last few months, we at BDO have been debating the future of our industry, of the profession, and our firm's role in that future. Well before the commencement of lockdown and the challenges of COVID-19, we were grappling with the role we can and must play in the future of the audit profession. Much of this conversation has centered around where we need to be clearer, and with this, what it means for our clients, our regulators, and our staff as a result. Clarity is our way. The word itself is clear, but most critically, it unlocks deeply relevant behaviors and intensely powerful conversations. It takes away the unnecessary. It replaces it with certainty. So while we as a profession need to talk about the need to win back trust, the only way we can do this is by creating certainty. And certainty comes when we are clear. For us, this is an almost dogmatic commitment to change. Not simply lip service to the frustrations in our society, but an active and practical shift in how we create value. This is our Clarity Charter. We are creating a higher standard by which we judge ourselves as BDO, so that we do what we as a profession should always have done. Today's conversation is a robust and engaged effort to begin our Clarity journey. It is a relevant and critical starting point for the question we all have. What does this mean for me?
Well, Mark, welcome to the conversation and good morning. I would say what a couple of weeks it has been. You've been in the business yourself for 35 years. You've seen many things. Institutionally, we know that BDO has been around for over 100 years. And it has seen its fair share of global economic upheaval. How does this moment in our country and in our society stack up against some of the crises we've witnessed before?
Good morning, Iman. Thank you. I think it'd be fair to say that I certainly have not seen anything the likes of which we've experienced in the last probably 3 years. Obviously, COVID in the last 9 months or so has been something exceptional. But where the profession finds itself in the last 3 years in this country has been something which I'm not sure any country has had to deal with. So it's an exciting time. It's a time where one has to be careful as to how we run our businesses. And of course, I think that never has there been a time where we've got such scrutiny of both ourselves as a firm and as a profession.
You know, there's been so much written or painted, I would say, onto the canvas that we call our economy. We've had this recently unveiled presidential economic recovery plan. We've got some really dismal jobs numbers, worse than expected growth expectations, and the list is endless. How does one begin to start to have this clear conversation about our economy?
Well, I think we've all got to understand exactly what part we play in changing the narrative. And as a profession, I think that each one of us who participate in it has to realize that we have a contribution to make. So while there are all these forums that may exist as to try and restore the credibility of the audit profession, it's got to start with us, those of us who choose to serve society. And I think that the minute that we understand that the collective of individuals can impact what goes on in the economy, the sooner we can make real changes. We've been talking about this Clarity Charter for some time, and I'm pleased to say that there's been a tremendous uptake from our staff, and that's really what it's all about, is making sure that we as a firm contribute to the wider discussion of what's going on in our economy.
I mean, I'm going to zoom in far more keenly on the role of audit firms in just a second, but I think what you touched on just there, about how in many ways, and you'd know this better than I, how markets are driven by sentiment. Sentiment is built by one individual at a time in our country, for example. And so there is a responsibility to listen very keenly to what we're hearing from people cross-sectorally in this diverse population of ours, but also to take, as you were saying, some responsibility in our sphere and area of influence.
Absolutely. And, sentiment is something which is probably at its all-time low right now in terms of the business environment of South Africa. And I think that each of us are probably responsible for contributing to that poor sentiment, because we have a bit of a herd mentality at times when there are negative issues to talk about. But I think that COVID has shown that there's lots of opportunity in our country. And we certainly are looking at growing our business through this opportunity that presents itself, and thereby contributing to a more positive sentiment, because I think that, as you rightly said in your question, was that the entire country is driven by the negative or positive sentiment that can be experienced. And I just recall some of the highlights of our country, and particularly around the sporting events that take place, where the entire country is uplifted. And we need something like that to happen on an economic basis. And I think that the President's recovery plan is a start, and I think that it lacks a bit of detail at the moment. I look forward to some of the detail that might come out of the medium-term budget that's coming up in just a few days' time, where I think there'll be greater clarity around what the President is trying to achieve.
I mean, we certainly do need the detail, because in a context of perforated trust, those can be the anchor points which we can refer to say there's X amount of funding that's going to go for project A or B in terms of the scope of what the President describes as our opportunity to really pull things back. And we're going to go to some of the detail in just a second in terms of what your sector can do. But the role of the auditing and consulting professions in our economy and society has been magnified. You know this. The lens looks very dirty given the scandals that have blighted big firms. I just want to share with you this recent headline in the Daily Maverick, and it was penned by Open Secrets, and it says, the big four audit firms, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, and PwC, all play a systemic role in economic crimes and state capture. The evidence suggests they've prioritized profit over professional duties and the law. So accountability and a reform of the industry are thus essential. Given that backdrop, how do you stay the trusted advisor in a context of all of these things going wrong in this economy?
Yeah, unfortunately, we all get tainted by these scandals, and I don't know enough about those big four firms, but I know that there have been scandals that have been created by a variety of other firms as well. So I'm not sure that the focus should necessarily be on those big four firms, but understandably, they are the prominent players in the market, and I think that the market takes its cue from what they do. I certainly think that they are very conscious of the contribution that they may have made to the situation that we find ourselves in, but they are also the leaders in changing that. The sharing of information that we have had from those firms has been outstanding in my view. We've been able to learn a tremendous amount from them in terms of the challenges that they've had, and I really think that they perhaps might have been aligned inappropriately. I think that they are doing an awful lot of good work. It might not be what the public expects, but I think that's the gap that we need to address. And it may not just be a re-look, it might be a rewrite of the contract between auditors and society that they serve. So it's not a tinkering, I don't think. I think it's a massive re-look at the rules.
And a point in history where we can, do an honest appraisal of the context in which we operate, call for the appropriate amendments and the tightening up and the shoring up of institutions, I think is always going to be a welcome thing. And in this vein, then, there are calls growing for the auditing profession amendment bill to be passed into law, and also to give the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors more teeth by amping up their ability to prosecute. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think that I agree mostly with the comment around increasing the capacity of the regulator. I think that they have been undercapacitated for some time. I'm not sure that I agree that there need to be additional rules. The rules are there, they just need to be applied. And I think that the government hopefully will be listening and providing more funds for the regulator. There are any number of examples of where the regulator perhaps has been perceived to not act swiftly enough. It's simply, I believe, due to a lack of capacity. Where is that funding going to come from? Well, it has to come from government largely. And as you know, the government has pressing financial needs in other areas, which could be argued are more important than the regulatory body for auditors. The impact, though, of poor audit results on the economy has got to be weighed up against the cost of it. And I think that we're at a point where the government has no choice but to increase the funding for the regulator.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a beehive approach that's needed from all sectors, all stakeholders in any of our industries, in any of our sectors, to work together to create the outcome and the kind of sea change that we need to move our country forward from an economic perspective.
Yeah, Iman, I sit on various forums, and I can assure you that the profession is acutely aware of the contribution that they have to make. And I've not come across anybody yet who is resisting that. So I think that there is a narrowing of the gap between those of us who are in the profession and those of the society who are needing to regulate the profession. I don't think that we're that far apart. I think everybody is focused on improving quality and ensuring that the outcomes of what we have seen over the last several years are the exception. We know that there are very few failures, yet it gets all the attention. Can one imagine all the successful audits that have been conducted during the last period with no comment?
Well, place that into context. I mean, give us a sense of just how on the other side, I mean, even though there are headline-grabbing incidents which highlight certain issues where there's scope for tightening up and better adherence to good governance, the amounts of work that go sort of unnoticed, that confirm the ability of audit firms to do a good job and others to do a good job.
Yeah, so I can just give you an example of our firm. We have several thousand clients who we perform audits on every year. We only have 50-odd listed clients that we perform audits on. Of course, those listed clients, because they're in the public arena, get more attention than the others, so one would understand that. We've been fortunate that we've not had any reputational issues or failures arising out of that. But I would guess that the proportion of unreported successful audits compared to those that have a negative outcome are just a fraction. I would imagine less than 1% of audits result in an audit failure. That 1% is, of course, too high when it involves public money, because that really is the issue. We need to be the custodians of public money. And what we've seen in the last several failures is it's public money that has been wasted.
Let's, as we round off our section in this conversation, look at the changing landscape within the sector. Clients are changing firms. As you said, in some instances where there's been reputational and operational damage, many other companies are benefiting from new clients coming on board. And again, the conventional wisdom is to tighten up internally. How expensive is it? I mean, is it a huge undertaking to improve audit quality and independence?
Yeah, it is. Iman, it's a massive cost, and I can talk about our firm and the investment that we are making. Globally, there's been some research done which has suggested that it takes 3% off the profit line. All I know is that our partners are willing to make the investment to ensure that the quality standards which are expected by the regulator are met. We've still got a long way to go and probably a lot more investment to make. But if one is going to be participating in the profession as we do, it's simply something that is unavoidable and should be embraced.
Just a final one, because I think it's important to recognize the opportunity for all of us to do better and the impact that it has, not only psychologically, but to all of our bottom lines, the bottom line of this economy, to do our part.
Yeah, I guess that we're taking quite a long-term view on it, because we think that by doing our part, we can actually gain more work. We see it as a differentiator between the various firms who offer the same type of service. And we really think that if we are able to get this right, clients will take notice and that there will be a revenue flow from it. So while it's easy to monitor the costs, the unknown is the upside of it. And we believe wholeheartedly that there's going to be an upside of it for us.
I hope it's not akin to hunting unicorns, Mark. I hope it's going to be far more within our grasp than just that. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark. So before we open up the panel discussion, let's revisit the BDO Clarity Charter and understand how BDO uses this concept to hold itself and its staff accountable to its stakeholders and clients.
Let's be clear. Let's say it right and do it right. Let's cut through the noise, say what we mean, and act like we mean it. Clarity isn't the opposite of complexity. Clarity doesn't mean there's only one answer. Clarity isn't a shortcut. Instead, it's a process, a refining of all our thinking and doing, until all that's left is the clearest articulation of who we are and how we work. Clarity is our line in the sand, our non-negotiable, and our clear way forward. Let's be clear.
Dr. Leila Fourie is the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and she's got a deep pedigree of understanding with 25 years of international experience in her field. Dr. Fourie has served on multiple boards, and she's held senior roles in banking, capital markets, and payments. And we all know she was appointed as CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in October 2019. She also sits on the UN Global Investors for Sustainable Development. Dr. Yaqub Abba Omar is the head of strategy and communications for the Banking Association of South Africa. Before that, he was director of operations of the Mapungubwe Institute and also served as South Africa's ambassador to Oman between 2003 and 2008, then in the UAE between 2008 and 2012. He's also served as Deputy Director General of the GCIS. Himal Baga Malji is the National Head of Audit for BDO here in South Africa, and he serves on the Exco. Having completed his articles at BDO, Himal went on to secondment to the US, and so he too comes with extensive experience in large audits of private companies as well as those listed on the JSE. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us today, and as I said in the beginning, I'm looking forward to a thought-provoking, insightful and fruitful conversation. So welcome to you all. Dr. Fourie, maybe if I can kick things off with you. Good morning and welcome to the session. In creating clarity, how do we craft a new contract with South Africa and South Africans?
Morning, Iman, and morning to my panelists and to everybody listening. It's a great privilege to be able to spend time with you. I think we have to see things in context. And Iman, 2020 has been genuinely a year of enormous uncertainty and disruption. And the global health pandemic has upended most aspects of our lives. And during times of crisis and great disruption, it's important to take a moment to reflect and to take stock on where we are. In the last few months, I've spent many hours in my capacity both as the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as well as the co-chair of the United Nations Global Investors for Sustainable Development, debating social, economic and governance changes that are necessary for us to build a more resilient economy. And the crisis has rather ironically presented the world with an opportunity to build back better. And so global leaders are very much aligned, and I had a meeting with the top 30 CEOs across the world as part of this UN group. These CEOs represent, for example, UBS, PIMCO, Citi, etc. And there was a unanimous view from all of these CEOs that resilience in social infrastructure, government and financial markets is very key to achieving this. And items like the BDO Clarity Charter indicates ownership and embracing of those very important principles. It's also very important for us to take the opportunity to reflect on the importance of trust, transparency, and ethics in the auditing profession. And because trust and transparency are the glue that bind financial markets in our industry, and without this, investor confidence and investor appetite are very much eroded. So in the aftermath of the GFC in 2008, investor trust across the globe was at an all-time low, and it took almost a decade to rebuild. And at this time, governments and asset managers, boards, regulators, and ordinary citizens saw how quickly trust was eroded and lost, and how long it took to rebuild. And the JSE's role is to provide an environment that leads to an effective capital market. And in so doing, there's a very fine balance in the regulation which serves to protect investors, but also doesn't hamper their corporate activity and the growth that's so essential, especially in a current downturn such as ours, the pandemic. And the responsibility is to uphold and embed the principles of clarity, and this rests on the shoulders of every participant in the value chain. In the recent years, we have published a number of amendments to our listings requirements, and these are aimed at driving behavioral changes. This has included things like diversity and changes to internal control requirements. But there have also been a number of recent instances of fines that we've imposed, and this is a crucial aspect in upholding the safety and trust in our markets, and also challenging poor failures in governance. So I'm particularly proud of the ongoing conversation that has been sparked by market consultations. And as a frontline regulator, we have the responsibility to the ecosystem, but we are also much stronger when we collaborate. Right. So if we are to truly emerge from the crisis stronger and more resilient, we must be guided by the collective pursuit of improvement that we do through active engagement, partnership, and cooperation.
Thank you so much for those opening scenarios, Leila. One of the things we'll deep dive into is, of course, the JSE embarks on its national roadshows, and you're also making an appeal to international investors to come on board. So we'll look more closely at what that investment message is and what it's predicated on, particularly in the context of, I mean, by anyone's definition, a chaotic economic environment, not only in South Africa and the continent, but around the world. Abba, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. And apart from being the head of strategy and comms at BASA, scenario planning is very much a pillar in your repertoire of expertise, and this includes the Indlu Lamiti scenarios, which looked at social cohesion a few years ago, looking onwards into 2030. I also understand that you've been involved in sketching our post-COVID-19 scenarios. Share with us a helicopter view of the kinds of shifts that are shaping our economic dynamism at this time.
Thank you, Iman, and thanks to BDO for hosting this discussion. Really looking forward to this panel discussion. I had a quick peek at the video that BDO had made of the event that they had at the beginning of the year. And when looking at the 12th March event, I thought, wow, that room, the optimism in that room was palpable. And now, 6-7 months later, the world has changed. So I think when you're looking at scenarios, you ask yourself, how much has changed? Has there been all that much continuity? And I think Mark has referred to that, where we try and look at the certainties and uncertainties in looking at scenarios. On the one hand, there's no doubt that the vast parts of humanity stand the prospect of more and more people being infected to death, given the impact of the pandemic, or even starved to death, given the global decline in economic activity. And we can see that even in South Africa in terms of poverty levels. Over and above that, we need to also keep in mind the whole issue of climate change, where we could be fried, drowned, or choked to death. And I'm painting this in pretty apocalyptic kind of terms, because these are some of the things we need to bear in mind when looking at the choices we make today. But before COVID-19, we had a situation where we believed that we were already in an economic crisis. We were already in a governance crisis. We had hit junk status. We had a huge skills deficit. So the Ndlulamiti scenarios, when looking at social cohesion, arrived at 3 key drivers that we needed to address. One was institutional capacity and leadership. The second was the issue of social inequality. And the third one, which we keep seeing popping up all the time, Iman, and I think you've spoken a lot about it, is the issue of reconciliation, resistance, and resentment, what we call the 3 R's. So on the basis of that, we've developed a barometer that tracks these various key drivers. And the sad part is that the most recent barometer, which was launched in June this year, indicates that a large part of the people in my age group, I'm not trying to say I'm in the above 55s, have become very negative and don't have very much hope for the future. Whereas a third of the younger people were saying that we can move towards what we call the Naile walk scenario, which is the more optimistic scenario where the National Development Plan can be achieved and so forth. So when looking at future scenarios, I'm going to stop there at this point because we can come back to that. When looking at future scenarios, we need to say how much of this are we taking forward? How much of this are we dealing with today? As we can see with the cases of corruption already, there's a large number of what we've inherited from the Zuma era coming to disturb our body politic. So I'll leave that at this point, and we can come back to some of the issues that we would like to discuss. Thank you, Iman.
Thank you. And you don't look a day over 50, darling. Here's an interesting adage, though. Scientists say that science is not about certainty. It's about finding the most reliable way of thinking, using the present, collective or reservoir of knowledge. And I think that that's really important because we're going to touch with you a little bit later on how you are able to create anchor points and stability in a time of continuous and endemic change, one would say. So thank you very much to Leila and to Abba for setting the opening scene there. With me in the studio is Himal. We touched a lot on your area, which is really focusing quite strongly on the audit profession itself. But what does clarity mean for our fiscal management then, and for budget planning processes?
I think, Leila, firstly, thank you, and it's a pleasure to have met you, and welcome to our panelists as well. I think if we look at the context of where South Africa has come from, and in the recent past also a lot of focus on mismanagement of funds, who's accountable, and certain forums being set up, certain investigations being set up to investigate, who's responsible, who's not. And I think we're at that stage right now where, coming through this pandemic, we are under a lot of pressure as South Africans at the end of the day. The budget makes, a lot of difference to people out there at the end of the day. And I believe that, we need to have a clearer approach. Who is responsible for what? Being very clear on the roles and designations of people, and also the accountability factor that goes with that. If we are not within our budgets, or if we are mismanaging funds, there has to be an accountability factor that goes with that. And that, in my view, has a knock-on effect. Although we have been demoted to junk status pre-COVID, Foreign investors are looking at these kind of things. They are looking at the accountability factor. And if we do nothing, then of course they're going to turn a blind eye and we're not going to attract foreign direct investment. Whereas if we create a culture of accountability, then I do believe that South Africans will become more positive and optimistic, and also that will then attract foreign direct investment into this country.
It's such a crucial linkage that you make between behavior and investment, and it goes to what Mark touched on briefly around sentiment. But we're living in a very real context. Just this morning, I had a conversation with Cynthia Stimple, who's one of the whistleblowers at SAA. My good friend and colleague Mandy Wiener wrote a book about the whistleblowers in South Africa. The prospects for even employment or anything like that doesn't look very good for people like that. So how do you realistically create in people adhering to processes and budgets a climate of not in my name? If I know that my colleague's doing something wrong, I'm going to say something and I'll be protected in the organization, not ostracized.
Yeah, I think, in my view, I think it starts at the top. It starts with the leaders. The leaders have to be tough, and they have to make those decisions at the end of the day. And I think that, whether it's in business or whether it's in government, if the leaders do not set the examples, then unfortunately, change will not happen. And an example is that our people, whether in our organization or within our country, they are influenced by the behavior of our leaders. And if our leaders are not going to take that tough, strong stance, then we cannot expect our people and the people within our organization and the people of this country to follow. So it starts at the leadership level.
Then it's logical for me to ask Mark whether he's a tough leader.
Yeah, I suppose leadership styles are different. I don't think that I'm a tough leader. I do like to try and be very clear in the direction that we want to go. And I think that by spending time in telling people what you're trying to achieve, that I can bring people along with me. However, there are times where one does have to take the tough measures. And as difficult as it is, they're absolutely necessary, and we will not hesitate to do that. As Himmel says, the leadership sets the tone for the entire example, as does government, and we need to ensure that the tone is set correctly.
It's so interesting when you speak in human terms and we really humanize the problem. As a journalist, when you see the headlines, it's always about numbers, it is about the scope of it, but it always boils down to individuals in their roles doing the right thing. And I'm really glad that that message is a consonant one that we're starting to hear. Leila, I was looking at a couple of interviews that you've been doing recently around the fortunes, the ebbs and flows in the fortunes of the JSE, this trend towards delistings and private markets. We know that it is a global phenomenon. And part of the core work that you have to do is making sure that beating the drum of keeping South Africa attractive to foreign investments is a sound that's very loud and very clear. How do you provide certainty in what I would say, and I'm an economic novice, a whipsaw sort of world?
So Iman, this is a really crucial part of markets with integrity. And the important thing is, firstly, we are an emerging market in the context of a broader developed global economy, and we are dependent on those foreign flows. And what is really crucial is that we comply with global standards and that we're at the forefront of governance. We do need to balance that with what is pragmatic and what is affordable for our listed entities. And we need to make sure that those listings requirements are pragmatic and purposeful. Having lived in Australia for 3 years, I have to say, it struck me how detailed and how absolutely transparent South Africa is relative to many other developed worlds, especially when it comes to our annual financial statements and our disclosure. We disclose margins and deep information down to business unit, or in some instances even product level. And you don't see any of that in many of the other countries. And we have, if you look at the World Economic Forum rankings for disclosure, been very highly rated. And you could question how those ratings are derived. But I think the point of the matter is that we should stand proud with the standards that we uphold in the country and that we hold our listed entities to. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean that it is impervious and completely resistant to issues like fraud. And you only need one or two high-profile, large-scale fraud incidents that unfortunately taint the entire industry. But that said, we on an ongoing basis, engage with market participants and with our peers globally, and our standards are at a world-class level. We recently introduced new changes to the debt listings requirements, and we also in December made adjustments to improve our equity listings requirements. The process that we are embarking on now is to look at requirements that perhaps don't give the level of certainty that one would like, but cost our issuers an enormous amount of money, so that we try and rebalance this pendulum, because I do think that the pendulum of governance is very much context specific. And you'll see post a crisis, we overload our transparency and our governance requirements with huge burden. And then as the markets fuel and grow and develop, those adjust down. And we've seen that in the US with Dodd-Frank being imposed after the GFC, and Trump now coming in and unwinding a lot of those requirements. And I think it does come down to what Imal and what the other panelists were saying around the human element. And there is a statement which I quote is, if the mores are strong, regulation is unnecessary. If the mores are weak, it's unenforceable. And I think the point of that statement, which is quite a contentious statement, because I'm by no means suggesting that regulation is unnecessary. It's absolutely necessary. But what is also necessary is a high moral standard. And that needs to be embraced from the top, as we said earlier, and enforced. And a balance of consequence is really crucial to indicate the importance of those standards. So it is a fine balance. We are doing a lot to engage with international investors. We have a roadshow later this month with some of our senior finance and Reserve Bank and other officials, together with listed entities, and we're hoping to take that roadshow to Dubai, London, and then also to Southeast Asia, to try and showcase the high standards and the relevance of the South African capital markets.
It certainly sounds like what you're saying from a JSE perspective connects, and that's a remarkable thing, that in order for this thing to be successful, clear, transparent, it needs the convergence and the cooperation of all players. How do you, I mean, and it can be to either Mark or to Himal, connect what is perhaps not as well known in the world, that our standards are high. I mean, as you said, sometimes we just go on what dominates our interest in terms of the headlines and errant behavior. But how do we connect all of these things to really bolster that story of South Africa being viable and sustainable?
Iman, I think that we've got something to be really proud of in this country. Our institutions have generally been outstanding. They've contributed to the economy, to the standing of the country globally. I think that we have lost our way in the last little while. And what Leila is talking about, the stakeholders, not only related to the JSE, but in the entire ecosystem of our economy, have to come together. I spoke earlier of taking personal responsibility within the profession, but of course, we're not an island in this. We have to collaborate with those that we work with, and thankfully we have relationships with our regulators, with the JSE, with the Prudential Authority, all who contribute to that. So I think the greater transparency and the greater collaboration there is between those various organs, I think the better the outcome is likely to be.
What do you think is the status of those collaborations? I mean, it really goes to the roles and responsibilities of the private sector and government. How well is that partnership working? Does it exist in a meaningful way?
Look, Iman, I think within the profession, those conversations are happening amongst the firms. But I think we may need a little bit more involvement from other stakeholders, and other stakeholders being, the governments and And I would also include in that, Iman, the non-executive directors that also sit on the boards of the listed entities. Listed entities and have non-executive directors that are given responsibilities in terms of, chairing audit committees and so on and so forth. So they also have a responsibility, towards this process. So it's not only the external auditors. I think there are many stakeholders, within the value chain. And there are conversations that are happening, but I do believe that there could be a convergence of the wider stakeholder group to adopt an approach of clarity, and we can define what that approach will be or can be. But I do believe if that takes place and we do make certain tweaks to the approach, I do believe we would get a positive outcome.
What might some of those tweaks be?
Again, I would come back to the non-executive directors, chairmen of the audit committees. I think their role and responsibility within the external audit process is key, and I think they need to work more closely with the external auditors. When contentious matters do arise. So I do believe that is a point that we can focus on. And I think as a profession, you mentioned something earlier that, the loss of one firm, the loss of a client of one firm is the gain of another firm and is revenue for another firm. And I believe as a profession, one of the things we could do is come together and we could have an agreement of some sort that if there is a client of questionable reputation, that is a loss to one firm and maybe a gain to another firm, we as a profession can stand together that if that company does not make the tough decision to deal with those board members of questionable reputation or deal with the matters that lead to the questionable reputation, then no audit firm will accept appointment.
Well, let me build a bridge between what you've just said and what I'm going to pose to Abba right now. In the very beginning, I said clarity is dictionary defined as freedom from ambiguity. And that's what you're referring to. Abba, to toss that to you, just again going back to the question of scenario planning, how does one plan to be able to get this freedom from ambiguity in a time of continuous change? So we're inside a global pandemic. We're flanked by the pressures around climate change. We are in an arena of conflictuous global politics. We've got the elections in the US, which we know impacts a lot of things in the markets. What are the mainstays? I'm not sure if you can hear us. We can't hear you, so you might have muted your microphone. There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, I had muted it. I was saying that's quite a fundamental question you're raising. I think, for a while there was a very fashionable acronym, VUCA. You may have come across it. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think this is the kind of world we've got at the moment, and we have to deal with it. So, we're going to, COVID-19, people have been raising whether it is a black swan event or not, the jury's out on that. But it has created and increased the level of uncertainty we have to deal with. So that's the first point. I think the question that you raised around what are the anchors that we can put down on, there's a number of areas that we could look at. And we simply need to look at how we have responded as humanity and as a country to COVID-19. At one level, notwithstanding the kind of protectionism and hyper-masculine authoritarianism of different rulers around the world, the globe has been looking at this as a response across the board that we all have to engage in. So I think for me, that's an important anchor, that there's potential for people, for this humanity to break down at one level and at another level to actually come together and say, we've got to do something. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the kind of points that have been made around regulations and improved governance and so forth, post 2008, 2009, if you look at our financial services sector, we have put down very strong frameworks. The The most important one would be around what we call the Twin Peaks model, where we were addressing the issues around conduct and prudential authorities, etc. Now, you know that there will always be some malfeasance coming in. And I think that the audit firms play quite an important role. But when you're looking at the banking sector in particular, we have to be mindful of this as a sector. The one reason, and I'm going to just cite, and early in the 20th century, there was quite a famous, notorious gangster called Will Sutton. And he went around robbing a lot of banks. And at one point, apparently a reporter asked him, so why do you rob the banks? And he says, that's where the money is, And I think that's going to be the challenge, that some of these kind of firms will have an image of being a kind of honeypot which people can go in and try and whittle away all kinds of millions and millions of rand. But the regulatory regimes that have come into place have been very important. I appreciate what Leila is saying about the importance of mores, and we can continue promoting good values. The Clarity Charter is very important for that. But we're going to need to make sure that the regulatory arm is strong enough. Tied to that is the compliance costs. Banks keep complaining about, and we all do, about the cost of complying. But we're realizing and recognizing also that the stability that is brought about by good governance, generally, whether it's in the state or in our individual firms, is worth the compliance costs that we have to do. So for me, some of the anchors then, having a global response to the crisis that we're facing, improving governance. We've seen the action we've taken against corruption around the PPEs as an example where we can improve on. The fact that we can talk and work through an economic recovery program the way the president announced last week are important indicators that these are the anchors of social compacting, coming together and looking at the way forward.
Just a quick one before I come back to our panelists in the studio, Abba. We are in a context of great change. I mean, that's the conventional wisdom. It is chaotic, and it requires us to exercise a kind of innovation that we've never seen before, particularly in our financial markets, but also when it comes to banking. And the banking sector in South Africa has been looked at as not really playing ball, especially with citizens or, families that are over indebted or families that want some debt relief or a break. What are some of the innovations that you can say the banking sector has made as a contribution to helping us over the turbulence and the turmoil of this moment for us?
Well, thank you very much. I don't want to sound like a spin doctor of the banking industry, but I think there are two main aspects to our responses. As soon as the state of national disaster was declared, for example, banks approached the government to be allowed to be able to come together, and a government gazette was issued, allowing governments to be able to collude, in a sense, as to how we respond to COVID-19. The immediate thing we did, and that was with the South African Reserve Bank, when they issued a directive that allowed us to begin restructuring a lot of the debts that people will be facing or were already facing at that point in time. So this is what we call the voluntary aspect, that banks have got the technology, they've got the commitment, and they want to make sure that business continues, individuals do not go into liquidation, etc. The second aspect has been around the loan guarantee scheme, and you heard the president refer to that and said that banks could be doing more. We have done as much as we can within the scheme, but I think the innovative areas are going to be a few other things like non-bank loan sources coming into play. Companies are scared of taking on more debt because that's what the loan guarantee scheme really implies. So looking at what equity options there are for either government through National Treasury or the Reserve Bank or any other institutions to be able to make sure that money is flowing into companies so that they can keep operating. I think the third and most important one would be to say, look, we as individual consumers need to be looking at how we can support various measures that are being introduced by your mom and pop businesses that are trying to survive. At the simplest level, supporting their business within the lockdown restrictions, possibly improving the individual investments we can make or the corporate investment we can make. The reality is that SMMEs are the backbone of almost all economies, and we need to ensure that they survive. So for me, those are some of the areas, looking at greater equity flowing into the businesses, looking at support measures for SMMEs to make sure they survive through this period.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we do a poll, we would say that there's still, you know, we're at the sheer face of the mountain right now. There's still a lot of ground that we need to cover in that regard. But when you talk about the smaller players, and we've had some moves vis-a-vis the township economy, Dr. Fourie, maybe to turn this one over to you. And it's really a question in two parts about bringing in the smaller players in terms of new listing opportunities. But some of the ideas that I heard you workshop with other panelists in other fora were around ideas relating to a depository receipt. And we're talking about exposures to companies like Google and Tencent and bringing them to local exposure. Engaging market participants, which, you know, perhaps don't give the same return on investment. How are you engaging with perhaps untapped areas in the market or new ways of innovating to really kind of shore up the fortunes of the JSE?
So I think I'd start by saying any exchange needs to be grounded in the economy in which it operates. And the JSE has a very long 133-year history of success in the country. Historically, the exchange has been built off large listed companies that have become multinationals and household names, like De Beers, Anglo, all of the banks, etc. It's also built its success off dual-listed companies, many large, both foreign and local companies that are dual listed. And we have a deep liquid market in the country, and we punch way above our weight relative to other emerging markets. That said, I do think that the growth node of the future of the country does lie in the SME space. And it's our social license in which we operate to ensure that we enable a market in that space. So what are we doing about that? We already, and have done for some time now, invest quite substantially in education and upliftment of the SME sector. We run very regular, right now, webcasts. Previously, they were face-to-face guidance. What we are also looking to introduce is a private placements platform that will not be an exchange in the same level of governance and oversight. It would be more of a what you call a township exchange or a buyer beware type environment that enables smaller companies to access liquidity in a slightly more standardized but not so governance intensive environment. Now, we must remember that these small and medium enterprises, the failure rate of these companies is high, and that's just the unfortunate nature of building a small company. The risks of losses are not insignificant, and so we do have to manage the access in that regard. However, we are busy engaging both the regulators and potential infrastructure providers in order to come together and to provide an enabling market like this. Because A, we need to build a pipeline for future large listed entities, and B, we need to enable and make a contribution to kickstarting the economy post the crisis. So we're very excited about that, but we need to collaborate with our market participants in order to make this a success.
Did you know that you are the same age as the Star newspaper? I was reading in the newspaper this morning, 133 years, as are you. So you were born in the same year. You share a birthday.
Wow, how interesting. That I would suggest that's not by coincidence, but possibly news and dissemination of information drives the exchange. So it doesn't surprise me. How interesting.
I think you should send a birthday cake over. I'm sure that my colleagues there would love that.
Celebration.
So as we begin to kind of steer this towards the finish line, so to speak, I mean, one of the things, Himal, that you were very clear on, and Mark as well, in this conversation to everyone that's listening is that we want to be able to take away things that we can do and use. I know behaviorally that is already clear, Mark. You've laid that terrain quite quickly. Leila, you've hinted at innovation, so that's also very, very clear. And if I look at some of the objectives for our conversation today, I think we can score ourselves 100% for having covered all of the territory. But one of the things the pair of you were quite keen on was for us to leave with those practical things that can be done. Some of them are outside of our control because they speak to the regulatory framework, and those are conversations that you must have with the relevant stakeholders and the writers of our policy and law. But if you're just thinking about this chat that we have just had, and oh my goodness, how time has flown, maybe just share with me some of your, what we call in journalism and in broadcast journalism, some of your outtakes that can be useful to the audience that's listening to us. It could be related to the regulatory framework and environment. It could be related to behavioral change. It could be to taking personal responsibility in the roles that you execute. So I'm going to go around the room, and maybe Himal, to start with you. I'll come to you, Abba, Leila, and then and Mark can give us a final word.
Thanks, Iman. Two things I'd like to talk about: our behavioral patterns. I think the lockdown in South Africa has I think allowed South Africans to reflect and I think become more responsible. And I do believe that we have a much more responsible population that will be going forward. I believe that in the last couple of weeks there has been a change in the trajectory of where our country can go. I mean, if we want to carry on the trajectory that we were on a couple of months ago, in my view, there's no point. It's not a trajectory I would like to be on. So I do believe there's a change, and I do believe we need to enforce that change as quick as possible. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is regulation. I do believe we've got all the regulation. I'm going to echo what Mark said earlier. We've got the regulation. I think if we're going to introduce further regulation, I think it's just going to complicate things a bit more. I think we've got to take the regulation that we have, and I think we've got to enforce that regulation. And the same thing I'd say about policy and economic policy. We've got it. We've got to enforce it, and we've got to monitor it. I wouldn't say police it. I would say we need to monitor it.
Well, that was really going to be the follow-up is, you can make the pragmatic call for certain things to happen, but some of it is slightly outside of your ambit or your sphere of influence.
Yep.
How do you make that message to those whose responsibility it is then to pick up the baton from you, to be able to, connect that disconnection, to achieve that outcome of greater accountability and transparency?
Look, Mark mentioned earlier there are various forums that out there, and those particular forums are within the profession and also at times outside of the profession, including the wider stakeholder group. So I do believe these conversations need to come up in those particular forums, and we just need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to set ourselves timelines of the change that we want to enforce. Or we want to introduce, and just hold ourselves accountable. And I do believe that, we'll be able to make a change.
Yeah, they say, there's an old African adage that says it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to make sure that everyone plays by the rules. Just by the way, we've been hoping for questions from our audience. You're more than welcome to post those as we conclude these sort of closing statements. If there are questions, I'm still able to put those to our participants. So you're more than welcome to make your contribution. There's a question mark on the bottom right of the screen, and you can click there. So we certainly have time for a few questions. Abba.
I think to take off from the point you were making about a village, I think we need to acknowledge that we're all in this together. We've had a number of proposals. One was the social partners at NEDLAC proposals that Business for South Africa was part of, which I think the President used a lot in his speech last week. You've also had the Presidential Economic Advisory Council's proposal. So, and having been through a lot of them, there's a lot of commonality around all that. The village part comes in that, we need to compact around this. We need to, at one level, government needs to get its act together. We need khawuleza, we need more immediate implementation, we need speed, etc. All that rhetoric is great, but it won't help if government doesn't get its act together. At the same time, we need to ask ourselves as labor, as business and social communities, what else can be done? What else can we be doing to make sure that these compacts and these agreements are realized? So my sense would be that one, we should be examining these proposals, seeing how we can implement it. Secondly, I think for business itself, there's a particular role we can play. And I just want to end off with citing the Venezuelan economist, Ricardo Hausmann, who was saying that when the state is weak, it's incumbent upon business to provide societal leadership. So we tend to sit back and think, well, Cyril Ramaphosa or Pretoria is going to deliver. We need to ask ourselves, what more can we be doing to make sure that we get out of the situation that we're in today and we're on an upward trajectory?
Yeah. Actually, you're echoing the sentiments. Yes, but you're echoing the sentiments of UJ-VC Professor Tiditi Marwala, who wrote in the Weekend Press exactly to that theme of all of our mutual responsibility in moving our country in the direction in which we anticipate. A quick one just to you, Abba. Part of what we need to establish is this clarity around doing business, about job creation and skills development. And we've sort of touched on it tangentially throughout this conversation. But do we have that reservoir of intelligence, again, which can speak to and really which we can predicate our ability to do credible scenario planning?
Scenario planning, yeah. We do have, I think we're blessed with incredible intellectual resources. I think, unfortunately, it kind of gets a bit dissipated. So that's where having this kind of landing the man or the woman on the moon kind of vision is what we require. We need to say, this is where we want to take our country to, and we should all work towards that. So I believe we've got the resources. Obviously we can bring in external resources and so forth, but we're blessed with that. We're blessed with intellectual resources. You go into the trade unions. I'm impressed with the people that I see there. I'm impressed with the young people I meet, especially around the Scenarios Project, who became very much involved in saying this is the kind of future they want. So I believe we've got that. I think what we do need to do is find ways of marshalling it together. Not gatekeeping, but allowing people to come in, sort of almost unleashing those animal spirits, but in the long-term interest of the country.
Dr. Fourie?
Thanks, Iman. And perhaps to build on your community and village concept and what Abba was so accurately and eloquently saying, that African proverb comes to mind, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go together, if you want to go far, go together. Yeah. Yes, and for me, this is all about collaboration, and having personally in my capacity as CEO, watched the unfolding of some of these large corporate events. What is absolutely vital is that all participants in the ecosystem need to collaborate. The NPA, the JSE, the auditing firms, the sponsors, the policy makers and the law enforcement officers associated with the Companies Act. And so ultimately, if there's a weak link in the chain, we cannot achieve the outcomes that are required. And unfortunately, there's that saying that trust arrives on foot but gallops away into the distance. And the point here is that we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be better every day. And it's about our attitude and the narrative that we put out into the press. And in fact, even in that ecosystem, the press is a really critical component. And we need to look at constructive ways of positioning the issues we are dealing with, and resolving them. And so mindset and genuine constructive contribution at an individual level is really important to resolving the current governance and economic problems that we're facing into.
Well, we spoke about the star's birthday, but do you think that that is the state of play right now vis-a-vis the media and, you know, and the subject matter that really impacts our lives and our decisions?
I can't say what the state of play is per se, but I do think we as a country, as citizens and as institutions and different participants have an important role to play, and I don't think we should underestimate the power and the importance of our narrative. I went to visit, after I arrived in South Africa a year ago, some investors in the UK, and one of them said to me, "This is a breath of fresh air. You're so positive. South Africans are congenitally negative about their country." And yes, there is a lot that we need to fix. There is a lot that we need to do to improve our governance and our economy generally. But there is also a lot that is working, and let's not lose sight of that. Let's not lose sight of the tremendously decisive and strong way in which we've managed the pandemic relative to other emerging market economies. And there are many other positive things that we shouldn't lose sight of.
So the questions are coming in thick and fast, and I'm going to distribute them. Abba, what effects have you seen from COVID-19 on the banking sector and the future of South Africa, considering people are more indebted and less able to service their debts? I think you might have done the muting thing again.
I'm sorry, I was so caught up in listening to Leila that I forgot to unmute. So I think the impact on, firstly on the banks has been huge. I think as people would know that, and you would have seen in the most recent round of results that banks have taken a knock. There has been a lot of write-downs because of impairments and so forth. I think we've had to ensure that the financial system somehow stays intact, and I'm glad to say that we've had the Reserve Bank, the Prudential Authority coming to the party and so forth. So it has taken an impact. Share prices have gone down by anything between 40 to 55%. So let's keep that in mind. The second thing is that it's true. South Africans are going to be more and more indebted. We can feel that. I don't think there's a single family that hasn't felt the impact. Even if you're retaining your job, someone in your family has lost their job or has been furloughed or not. So I think let's keep that in mind. And I think that the important part, and before I come back to what can be done about it, you may have seen Larry Summers yesterday in the Fareed Zakaria's program when he's written an article that speaks about the cost of COVID-19 to the U.S. economy being $16 trillion. So, we're talking about incredible impact. The global recession is nothing compared to that. The Great Depression, nothing compared to that. So we need to really look at what we can do. Now, there's a number of things. One is that we can say, well, government should throw the kitchen sink at, making sure people survive. And I think that's going to be the really important thing, that we can't compromise on the survival of people. In fact, for me, the most worrying news that I woke up to this morning was hearing that our Minister of Health has contracted COVID-19. He's been leading an incredible, there's been a few controversial points here and there. As Leila says, we're so aware of our negative aspects, but he's been leading an incredible response to COVID-19. So preserving lives is going to be critical. What banks can do, they're going to be shaped by what the regulators expect them to do. If they feel that we should be loosening loans, we should be being part of the equity solution, all this kind of things needs to be done. For me, the thing is to accept that this is deep and this is long, and we're going to need resources for the long run. We can't just look at immediate solutions, throwing all the money at it immediately. It's going to be around for a few years at least.
Again, coming back to the theme of resourcefulness, we know this year there was this fantastic show of horticulture in the National Assembly. The finance minister arrives with the aloe vera, and that was supposed to be our totem for how we can be so resilient going forward, because this plant is so resilient. One wonders what he's going to do come time for the medium-term budget speech. But what is your expectation for this speech, Himal?
Look, I think he's going to build on the economic recovery plan that the president sort of outlined last week. But I think he's going to have a tough job. He's going to have to look at how we service the high debt levels and also allocate, take stock currently of where we are and allocate funds to the areas that require priority in the next 6 months. So I think he's going to have a tough job ahead of him. No one's ever going to be happy with most probably what he's going to table, but I think he's going to have to divert funds to what's going to be priority right now, and I think there's going to have to be some funds directed towards kickstarting this economy. A lot of people have lost jobs, and I know the president has tabled a plan to create jobs in the next 12 months and then within the next 24 months. Yeah. But I think that's going to have to be a priority to start getting people working, getting them out of their houses again and kickstarting this economy.
Yeah, I mean, I only found out this morning quite an interesting fact around EPWP and the program. Did you know that 70% of people in the program actually go on to have permanent jobs? Sure. I mean, I didn't know that. I thought the number was going to be much lower. So we've got some green shoots that we can certainly work with. Mark, the final word is up to you, and it comes through a question as well. What are your thoughts on our growth prospects as South Africa in 2021?
So if I could just perhaps take a step back with regards to the economic recovery plan, because I think it's important that the plan is not just dismissed. I liked Abba's comments about the social compact. I agree 100% with the extension of the support to the most vulnerable people in our society. I also like the fact that there is a focus on extending the accessibility of broadband to the greater community, because I think technology has got to be one of the biggest drivers of economic advancement. So that's an area that I really look forward to. And then I think that we as an organization are very optimistic about how the future might look. And we need to embrace technology. We need to understand our relationship with society. And I think that we really are able to look forward to much greener shoots. I'm not negative at all about where the country is going. And I look forward to not only our firm prospering, but South African economy prospering.
And I hope you all stay healthy.
Absolutely.
There aren't any other curveballs that happen via a national pandemic. Mark, Himal, Leila and Abba, what a pleasure it's been hosting this conversation with you today. And for all of you who are participating and listening, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for some really great questions. One thing we do know is that we have to keep the conversation going. And if there's anything that's a surefire way of fueling ourselves and our economy, and that is to be credibly optimistic. I don't want to say entirely optimistic, because I think a fair level of caution is always worth it. But there is still a lot, as all of our panelists are saying, that we can work on and work towards in this economy. So thank you very much for joining us for the second Clarity Session. Thank you to BDO for inviting me to be your moderator today. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.
Clarity means I speak the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
It means I'm an honest, direct, and deliberate business partner.
Clarity means I don't hide from facts.
I'm clear about what I know and what I don't.
Today it's too easy to hide behind vagueness and broadness.
It's too easy to say a lot without saying anything at all.
To be clear means delivering clear thinking, a clear message, and a clear proposition to our colleagues, our clients,
and even the whole country.
A proposition that says,
we're in this for the long game.
We know that trust is earned by being trustworthy.
And credibility is built by being credible.
So let's be clear. Let's own it, live it, and show it.
We all have an equal part to play.
It's our collective effort that delivers the results.
And it starts with owning my work, my message, and my voice.
It starts with me.
And 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 me.